Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to be reacting to a technique tip by pianist Boris Giltburg on how to avoid a harsh sounding tone at the piano. Now this is a short that is from Tone-Based Piano's channel, and basically Tone-Based has an online paid platform where they collaborate with amazing artists, pianists to produce teaching content, and they have a bunch of courses by a lot of really amazing pianists. And so this video, I'm not sure if it's from a longer video on their channel or if it's just from some of the content that they did with Boris Giltburg on their paid platform. But in any case, Boris Giltburg is a phenomenal pianist, so I want to review this for you guys and give my 2 cents on his ideas. So without further ado, let's go ahead and watch the video.
If you hear someone with a harsh sound, or if you find yourself producing harsh sounds, in almost every case, the reason is that either the wrist or the elbow is tense and blocked, and that means you are only playing from the hand or from the forearm, not from your entire hand. The basic position of the hand as a relaxed noodle. Imagine your hand as being completely devoid of anything hard or tense, so effectively a very soft hanging part of your body, and then you connect to the key at the moment just with the tip of your finger, and you, in a single note, let your hand hang from the key. You could go quite loud, still not reach a harsh sound. That's the thing to do. Relax your arm, imagine it soft and relaxed in the air, and then also when you play, it still remains soft.
So what's interesting about kind of some of what he's saying there is that essentially he's saying that being tensed, that is the enemy to a good sound, or in other words, being tense is what's going to cause a harsh sound. Now, it's not entirely wrong, but the reason for that is that when we play, we have to make sure that our fingers, our hand, and our arm actually all functions together as a unit so that we can ultimately control what we do at the keyboard. And when we have a lot of tension and the ensuing result is a harsh sound, it's usually because those things are not working in conjunction with each other. And so one part of the body has to work really hard to try to make sound at the keyboard, whether it's a scale or a big chord, and it's very hard to control that thing, and so it's actually too much volume, and that's what's creating the harsh sound. When we play the piano, it's an inescapable fact that volume is determined by how fast the key goes down, and that's really the only thing that we can control. So you'll never hear someone play softly with a harsh sound, and you'll never hear someone play very loudly with a very kind of soft, rounded, pearly tone. And that's because the tone that we produce at the piano it goes hand in hand with the volume that we play at. So this is the thing that people say is playing loudly, but without getting harsh sound. And really what that means is actually too much sound. The louder you go, the more harsh the sound will. And I would actually argue that when he plays that last chord that's the loudest, that actually is getting a little bit on the edge of being kind of harsh. And this is a thing that I find is, really important to understand, is that the volume at the keyboard is not based on one note. So for instance, you'll have, that chord there. Well, it really, was getting kind of harsh sounding, and the overall, volume was very high. So if you want less harshness, it just has to be a little bit softer. Well, the thing is that people would say, but that can't be because I listen to recordings and their sound is huge, but it doesn't sound harsh. Well, that's because pieces of music are not written like that, where it's 2 notes or 3 notes high up on the register. It's all across the keyboard. There's all these notes happening all at once. And this is illustrated if you think about Bach, okay? So Bach wrote the music that we play on the piano, but he wrote it for the harpsichord. And the harpsichord is not capable of touch-sensitive playing, which means that apparently Bach just thought everything was just completely flat. no changes in loud and soft. And that's the way people think of it. But that's actually completely false, okay? When Bach wants it to be softer, he writes less notes, a single line, maybe 2 lines, 2 notes at the same time. When he wants more, he writes layer upon layer, okay? And that's how he gets it, okay? So what that means is that by definition, when we stack all these notes on top of each other, overall it's going to be louder. And that's how we can get what sounds like a tremendously big sound, but the tone is beautiful. It's not harsh at all. The problem is that when we teach students, oftentimes, we focus on one single note and we say, oh, you need to play this note louder, and they try, but it gets this really harsh sound. When in reality, when we're playing something and we're playing across the keyboard, multiple notes on top of each other, multiple voices happen all at once, 3, 4 voices, that's what creates that depth of sound. The pedal is another thing that helps us get more sound, okay? So you can use the pedal to give chords more resonance, more volume, that's another thing. And your dynamic shading also plays a huge role in this. And so oftentimes, really what it is people are trying to play too loud, and that's why their sound's getting harsh. The second thing is going back to what he was talking about, things being relaxed. I really, and I say this with no respect intended to Boris Giltburg. He's a phenomenal pianist. I don't know a whole lot about him, but I have seen him perform some things, and he's incredible. The problem is that he's probably just a really natural player. He's been playing so long, he doesn't think about it, and he doesn't really understand what he's actually doing. So he tells the viewer to play like everything's really loose. And so on one hand, he says, you just play and you let your hand hang from the keys. And this is an idea that goes back to the old school arm weight technique, where you would play a chord and you'd relax your wrist so your hand kind of hangs from the keys. The problem is that it makes the wrist relax, but the hand is actually very tense, because now my hand is trying to fall down and I have to squeeze with my fingers. Well, you can imagine in many situations, making the hand tight, making the fingers really tense like claws, that's actually going to make everything harder. And so it has its downfall. But the other thing that he says is your wrist or your elbow and your shoulder, they have to be really loose. And he does this. So he kind of pushes into the keys, lets the wrist go down, but then he kind of does this with his. So by loose, he means mobile, but he's not explaining the movements that he's making at all. Your wrist is moving, your shoulder's moving. So I would say that it's kind of unhelpful, because that's not playing like your arm is a really wet noodle, right? And this is where people get into trouble. We don't play with the wrist loose. People say, you need to play with your wrist loose. Well, that's not how we play, though. Your elbow needs to be loose. Well, but that's not how we play, etc. The shoulder, okay? So the way it works is that in order for the finger, the hand, and the arm, and that goes all the way to the shoulder, in order for that to play as a unit and everything moves and works together, that means that we have all these joints. We have this joint, this main joint in the hand, we have our wrist joint, we have our elbow joint, we have our shoulder joint, and we even have our finger joints. And depending on where we're playing on the keyboard register, white keys to black keys, so in or out on the keyboard, different positions, side to side, etc. And depending upon how loud we're playing or how wide the notes are apart, we're going to actually change position of those joints, okay? So if I'm playing here, my joints are in this position here. Well, what if I'm playing down here? Every one of these joints is in a very different position, okay? So it's sort of like if someone's walking, you wouldn't say to them, well, you need to walk and you need to be really loose. Your legs are floppy, wet noodles. That's not how we walk, okay? The way we walk is that as we move, our joints are constantly moving and changing their positions, and this is what helps us balance, okay? Your ankle joint, even the joints in your toes, your knee joint, your hip joint, etc. They're all moving and adjusting as we walk. And as we take a step, we're bridging the gap in between each one of those footfalls. So everything is moving like a perfectly well-oiled machine. And that's exactly when we play the piano. If I'm playing, let's say I'm playing an arpeggio down, and I'm going from here and I'm ending up here, you can see that my joints are in a very different position on the high and low end. Well, we have to have a way of bridging the gap as we move from one position to the next. And this is what people think of as things being really loose, because it feels like I'm loose. If I'm just playing across the keyboard, it feels like my wrist is just kind of loose all the time. But really that feeling of being loose is the absence of tension, right? Same with my elbow, same with my shoulder. The real thing, the real answer here is that our joints have to be in the correct position depending on what we're playing at all times. But of course that doesn't mean that, okay, this position and now I'm in, this position. Well, we have to bridge the gap all the time when we're playing. I've used this analogy a lot with my students, is that's like when you walk from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. Every time you take a step, if you shift your weight from one leg to the next, from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet, it moves and shifts, and your body realigns so that you're balanced. And it's the same thing when we play. From my thumb to my second finger, guess what? My elbow moved, my wrist readjusted, my shoulder moved. Everything constantly moves all the time as we're playing, because if it doesn't, that means that joint's being held in a stiff position, so tension comes in, those muscles get tight, but it means that those joints are not in a good position to work together as a holistic whole. And that's really the answer, okay, to what he's calling wet noodle technique, I guess. The other thing is that, he's not wrong, because there is a sense that when you play a chord, you can have, a follow through like so, and that can kind of, help from hitting that key bed, having the key bed kind of hit you back, right? So if I just push into the key like that, well, the volume was louder and it also sounded a little harsh. So this way, I can get a nice big sound, but it doesn't get harsh because I'm actually putting the key down a little slower. So those motions are actually helping me control the key and buffer as I'm going into the key. It's the same thing as if I play with more of a dropping technique, which is sort of my preferred method for playing chords. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to let my wrists kind of be loose and kind of, it's almost like a little shock absorber, right? So, right, if I don't do that, you say, it starts sounding harsh. Well, that's because you're tense. Well, kind of, but really what's happening there is that the key's going down faster and I'm hitting that key bed with more momentum. It's going down faster, and some people complain that it actually hurts. To me, that doesn't hurt, but of course it's too loud, it's too intense. So, I think that, great pianists have a lot of great things to say, but usually what we find is they don't really understand technique, and there's a reason why they're a pianist and not a teacher. And so I would say that information or, teaching, tips or whatever like that, they're not necessarily bad because there's always truth to them. Like tension does produce, bad sound, but why does it? And the problem is we're so focused on playing without tension that what happens is we think if I relax, that will solve everything. But you watch him play, but he's not relaxed though. His elbow isn't loose. He's moving it in this almost choreographed pattern. So it's not relaxation that's so much important. It's how we're moving. It's actually movement that's most important. And that's 100% of what I teach my students in my lessons every single week.